Hi, everyone, and welcome to Dogs Unknown. I'm Sarah Fraser here with Brian Burton, and we are super excited about today's episode. Today, we're going to be peeling back the curtain and taking a look at what it's really like to live with and love and provide training for a dog who has maybe some more complex behavior issues like fear or reactivity, anxiety or aggression issues, because it can feel like a pretty mysterious undertaking to a lot of folks. A lot of times our only exposure really to what behavior therapy or behavior modification looks like is through some pretty dramatized television shows. So we wanted to give you a chance to hear from dog owners who've really gone through this process and are still going through this process because it never really is over. So we are so excited today to welcome Stephanie Chen and Jessica Arnold to the podcast. Stephanie and Jessica are both Instinct clients, Stephanie for her dog Nimbus and Jessica for her dog Nova. Welcome to you both. We're so happy that you're here.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. So starting off, I think I would just love for people to know really briefly, I know it's really easy to talk about your dog forever, but really briefly sort of background info about each of your dogs and the issues that you were experiencing before you reached out for help.
Sure. I'm happy to start. My dog Nova is a 2-year-old East African village dog and from Sudan. And he started to experience signs of big feelings when he was around 4 or 5 months old. And it started with resource guarding, chicken bones in the garden. And that was really the first indication that that I need help. But then it later evolved into showing other signs of big feelings and also recognition that it was beyond what I had the capability of addressing. And that kind of was manifest in unleashed reactivity, which is the primary reason why we went to Instinct and sought professional help. Unleashed reactivity primarily to other dogs, but then also had other concerns when it came to passing other people in narrow areas and narrow spaces. And then most recently, cooperative care. Going to vet visits used to be something that he was able to do more comfortably and has become a big place of anxiety for Nova. So we are working on cooperative care and have also been working with a vet behaviorist in tandem with going to Instinct for training.
Awesome. Thanks for that overview, Jessica. That's helpful for people to have kind of the lay of the land as we go through the rest of the conversation. Yep. And then Stephanie, how about you?
So we also have a 2-year-old. His name is Nimbus. He's a Bernedoodle. Actually struggling with relatively similar things as Jessica is struggling with Nimbus. Early on with us, he started resource guarding, especially with other dogs. And then also had, as he matured, a little bit more like leash reactivity. And so we actually came to Instinct for 2 things. One was his leash reactivity, which we've gone through so many other different obedience training and we just couldn't figure out a way that worked for him. And so that's one of the main reasons we reached out to Instinct, just because the recommendations people were giving us we just weren't communicating with him. And then the second one, which was really hard for us to admit, was he kind of got, like Jessica was saying, big feelings. And he would get so excited on these walks and we would walk him for hours on an end because we felt like he had too much energy and he would redirect on us. And so we would just struggle with that because it's our baby. We've been taking care of him, feed him, all those things, and he would be redirecting on us. So just trying to manage those 2 things was the first things we reached out to Instinct for. And just like Jessica, we also reached out for cooperative care as well because we struggle. He is also a big feeling boy. And he struggled really if he encountered anything that was really painful in his life, he remembers that pretty much forever. And so he went to the vet and got his dew claw accidentally nicked. And from then on, we could not brush his front paws. So those are the things that we've reached out to Instinct about.
Cool. That's super helpful. Yeah. Thanks to you both for that. And I think you started to hit on something, Stephanie, that leads into my next question, just about how it felt, how some of those behaviors felt. I think that's one of the hardest parts is if you're both comfortable sharing, I would love to hear sort of what were some of the thoughts and feelings that you were experiencing when your dog started, when Nimbus or when Nova started to display some of these behavior issues? What were some of the thoughts and emotions, I guess, that came to the forefront?
I can start. For me and for Mike, I think the biggest, I guess there was like three feelings, right? Like one main feeling was around the fact that like we've raised him since he was a puppy. We took him through all of the obedience training we possibly could. He's done like 3 rounds of obedience training. We had like watched every Zach George video known to man. Like we watched all the YouTube videos, and like it just felt like we did everything we thought we could do. We have a closet full of snuffle mats and frozen Kong stuff and like everything, right? Like we thought we were just like, we just didn't know, like, what did we do wrong? And like, why is all of the other doodles on the streets that like people pay a bunch of money for, they're fine, but like Nimbus has this like something. Why is he feeling this way? And like, why is he doing this to us? And like, what are we doing wrong? Like there were so many tears. Like Jessica and I have talked about this on our walks too. Like just this feeling of like frustration. Like we've done so much for them, or at least for me and Mike, like we've done so much for him. Why is he like that? And like, then the second thing was like, as we went through some of these trainings, it was like, why are we not able to communicate with him? Why are the things that other people are telling us works for their dog not working for Nimbus? Why is like when we tell him to sit when he's reacting, he's not sitting? Like that was like one of the biggest recommendations people told us. Or like when we scatter stuff on the floor, instead he would rather just like nibble on my arms or like my sleeves. Like why is that happening? Right? Like that was like the second like biggest thing. And like the third thing, and I think we talked about this, is like, would he ever need something besides just obedience training? Like at what point do we need to consider something like medicine? And that to me, like, even though my husband is in the medical field, I was like so afraid of that, because it just meant that it could be something that he could be on forever, that like maybe he's broken, and that to me, I was like, what the heck? Like it's nothing like the dog I grew up with. Like the dog I grew up with had no, and in my mind he has no like behavioral problems. She had no behavioral problems. Clearly she probably did, we just didn't know. But like that is, I think those are like the three things, like as we started to look at like, should we reach out to someone else for help? We're like, we did all these things. I just don't know. So yeah, that's me.
Oh, I think that's going to resonate so strongly with so many people, like every bit of what you just said, Stephanie. And it's, I really appreciate you sharing it for sure.
Yeah.
It resonates with me because those are some of the same feelings that I had too with Nova's. I mean, our stories are slightly different, but I think in terms of the responses, in terms of wanting to do the best for your dog, one of the big things that I felt even before Nova and I had moved from Sudan to the US, I just remember feeling like, okay, I've committed to this dog. I'm completely overwhelmed. I think that was the biggest feeling that I felt, is I feel completely overwhelmed because I'm not in a position or in the physical environment that provides the types of resources that I feel like I need, but I also don't know what are the types of resources that we need. So hopefully going to the US will make it easier to find places that can help us. But admittedly, I thought it was training, that he needed obedience training, that would solve sort of the behavioral challenges that we were seeing, which I was at a point in my dog ownership, and I didn't know all the things that I didn't know in terms of dog behavior and what the possibilities are. And I remember feeling very uncertain about the type of training that would be best for him, and exploring all the different options in terms of like the state that we moved to initially before coming to New York. Compulsive and balance training was the predominant type of training that was available. And I remember thinking very hard then about the type of relationship that I would want to have with my dog, and it being not of one that I felt was more coercive, but I didn't know an alternative to that either. So eventually that's when we started doing positive reinforcement-based training, and it's something that I felt was more aligned with the type of relationship that I would want to have with my dog, but also one that I thought could go in tandem well with behavioral medications, which is the first time that I had even been introduced to that type of component of behavioral therapy. So by the time I was ready to move to New York, I really felt like instinct was our best fit. And I was hoping that we could be taken on as clients, but definitely big feelings of uncertainty, feeling overwhelmed, not knowing how to move forward. And also there was a certain level for me, there's a certain level of a specific type of loneliness and isolation in having a dog like this. Like for me, I didn't know other people who had dogs with similar type of issues. And so it felt like I knew from the time Nova was 4 or 5 months old that this was going to be a difficult way forward, but it still felt very lonely and isolating at times.
I think there's almost like a mourning or grieving process that you have to go through. I feel like sometimes, like to your point, Jessica, that like it's not, and we talked about this on our last episode, that people generally don't get dogs because they want to work through behavior issues. I think like most people have like visions of like what that's actually going to look like and what you can do with your dog, and whether it's going to family gatherings or going to a patio or greeting dogs on the street. And I feel like when that reality hits, it can hit pretty hard. And that speaks to me a lot because before we actually did this, for a living and had dogs and, had to deal with stuff before we really got into training, that, with a leash reactive dog that we had, I remember thinking that because like you have these visions of what you think things are going to be like. And then knowing that that's not going to be the case is one thing. And then also it's sort of like, what is the path forward and what that can look like. So I just wanted to add in there that I feel like, at least for me, I don't know if that's, for you, Jessica, there, but it's that hits hard. I think once you have that realization, and it is something that you kind of have to process and go through before getting to a point where you're ready to move forward, I feel like. But for anyone listening, if you're feeling like that, that's completely normal. Mm-hmm. And it honestly kind of sucks at that point. Like that it really sucks. And
I think it's almost, you feel almost guilty feeling it because it's, in some way it suggests that you don't love your dog, but like you do love your dog so much. It's just, but things are different than what you were expecting. And the life that you thought you were going to have together is going to be different than what you were expecting. And that's, it stinks.
Yeah.
Like it's hard. The other thing I really like that both of you talked about that I think people will really resonate with people is just that whole idea of feeling like, what did we do wrong or what's wrong with my dog, or both at the same time, and taking some of those issues. I know you mentioned too, especially with some of the redirection stuff, Stephanie, that like, mm-hmm. It's hard not to take that very personally and feel really frustrated about like, really, are you really directing at us, like at your people? It's hard not to feel like that. And I think especially when you are sort of sold this, I know we talked about this in a previous episode too, but when you are kind of sold this idea that there is a fix out there, and it is just training these behaviors to a certain level and just do ABC in with whatever method, and it'll solve your problem. And so if that's not working in your mind as an owner, you're thinking like, well, either I'm doing something wrong, or Stephanie, to your point, or my dog is broken. And that's really hard, just knowing where to go from there. So I really appreciate you both sharing that. And I think there's a ton of people out there who will relate very strongly to what you were saying. So you're having all these feelings, and then what was there kind of a critical point or a specific incident or event that prompted you to reach out for additional help, or was it a gradual build?
For me, I think I was just like reflecting on what Jessica said around the different types of training. Like at some point after going through all these different like obedience training, and we got to a point where he was like, and I don't know like if I want to say this, but he was like actively like hurting us, and like he was over a year old, and like going online, we were like, oh, this could be like a dangerous dog. Like when people put labels on the dogs, it makes you really scared. Like he could be aggressive. Like you should start looking into e-collars and like to prevent yourself from being hurt. And like, then you read all these like dangerous dog blogs. And so we were starting to go down this path of like, we've tried so many, like you were saying, Sarah, like cookie cutter, like do this with your dog and it will fix everything. And it just like wasn't helping. And so I think the thing that prompted us was like, we had so many proof points of it's not what we're doing. It just isn't working. And we love him, you know, we want him to also be in a, like, when you see your dog reacting, he's clearly not having the time of his life. Like, he's clearly unhappy. And like, we could tell, but we just didn't know how to do anything about it. And I think after like months of just like trying to do what people had told us, we just couldn't do anything else that was like cookie cutter. And that's when we reached out, right? Where we were like, hey, we've tried all these things. We don't know what to do anymore. I'm pretty sure I bawled on several of the Q&A sessions that you've had. Like, I've definitely called Jessica, not Jessica Arnold, but like our trainer, Jessica, crying, just trying to figure out how to communicate and understand the situation that Nimbus, what was Nimbus feeling? Why was he doing this? What isn't and is not working for him? It's like hard to like get to understand where Nimbus even was unless we like sat down with someone and explained the situation. You know, 4 hours of walking, Nimbus wasn't at that energy level anymore. Maybe reduce that. Like some of those things that we just like didn't like logically now looking back, now that we know these things, we like understand. But at that point we were just like, all of these things, Nimbus's big feelings, he's redirecting on us. Like we couldn't get, it felt like the number of bad experiences we were having with him significantly outweighed the happiness, the happy moments we had with him. And at that point we were like, it's not that you only get a dog for those happy moments, but we also know that when he has those unhappy, big feeling moments, when he is unable to control his emotions, he's like not happy either, right? And so that's kind of what really tipped us over the edge.
Yeah, I think that's...
How about you, Jessica?
I think that's similar in some ways. I really knew from the time Nova was young that I needed a lot of help. It was the move to New York that when I knew that I really needed additional help, not, you know, going beyond training. I needed help yesterday because everything was stressful. Leaving our building was difficult. Walking in the courtyard, you know, doing relief breaks, everything was hard because there were just so many triggers for Nova, and Nova also redirects. And so the frustration of the explosive reactions and the redirections onto me really felt like every day was exceptionally hard. And there wasn't really a way around that. I felt, to like going back to the feelings part, that having Nova was incompatible in some ways with my own lifestyle and living in Manhattan. And so I was reassessing whether this was even the right thing for me to be doing. Is it better for me to move out of the city? And what would that mean in terms of my work? And there were so many big questions that I was having. It felt like I just needed something to have some sort of relief, and going to seeking out additional help in that way to help with some of those things. It just felt like it could never get easier because of the big explosive reactions. And I think those were some of the things that led me to seeking out additional help, and also being for me, I was very open to putting Nova on behavioral medications because he was just having a really, really hard time being in New York. And so I wanted to explore what that looked like.
Yeah, I think those are both pretty common experiences, as there's maybe like a change in environment or living situation, that it's not that there weren't issues previously, but they maybe felt a little bit more manageable, or not at a point of total crisis where it just felt not sustainable on a day-to-day basis. And then Stephanie, I love what you mentioned too, with like, there was kind of a slow build of we've done all these things. And then it sounds like when you started to hit a point where you started to maybe consider options that didn't align with the relationship that you wanted to have with Nimbus, you were like, oh shoot, maybe we need to do something else, if we've reached this point.
Yeah.
It's scary though, the moment you're thinking like, I love my dog, but I don't know if I'll need to use a shock collar, because at some point I'm getting more hurt taking him outside than I think I should be. Like, I think at that point, Mike and I were like, holy moly, like we really need to like reassess how we think about our relationship with our dog. Like, what do we want out of this? Because at some point when we got him, we were like, we are gonna take Nimbus to picnics in Central Park, and he's gonna sit on the patio with us while we brunch with our friends, right? Like, and he did when he was younger, like when he was a puppy, he literally did that. And like, oh, he's squeaking in the background. He literally did, right? Like he like, did you guys hear him?
It wouldn't be a dog podcast without dog noises in the background. So
he squeaks when he sleeps very deeply. But yeah, like, and then at some point Mike and I were like, that isn't even in the realm of possibility in our head anymore. Like, we are now at the point where we're like, how do we actually just exist in the city, right? Like, just like Jessica was saying, like New York City is insanely triggering for a dog. Like, at some point when Nimbus first moved here, he was scared of like the little, the little flappy stuff that's attached to scaffolding. Like, he would run away from that. It was crazy.
Yeah. And that actually reminds me, the environment for sure can be a huge driver of behavior, because it's not uncommon to see people who come from like a rural or suburban environment and come into to one of the cities that we have locations in, and then they really struggle. So it was like stuff that was manageable in a different environment, and that can happen. And it can happen the other way too, because there are dogs who are not leash reactive in the city, and then they go to a rural environment where you only see a dog like once every day and a half, and it's like the one dog, and you can see it coming, and it's like this big buildup. So we've also had dogs like the opposite way. They change environments. So I did want to bring that up, because I know we're talking about New York City, which has a whole host of challenges in terms of behavior, both for dogs and people. Like, it's I love the city, but there's a lot of environmental stressors that can be there. So just for anyone listening, where if they had a change in environment recently, and that can even just be like changing home, going from a home to an apartment or vice versa, all of those things can definitely play into it. And I did also just want to touch on your point, just sort of about going down the, the path of like aversive training. Like, it's honestly like so when I speak with people who have gone down that path or are considering going down that path, and we will be doing a whole episode to be completely clear. Like, Sarah and I were balance trainers when we first started 15 years ago. So we are in no place to judge, right? Even though it's been over a decade now that we train this way. But I do feel like people who are looking at that or seeking that, it's not because they're bad. Like, anyone who's paying for a consult loves their dog. Like, I really don't know, thousands of dogs, with the exception maybe one or two cases where it was just a really bad fit all around. Like, everyone who I've spoke to loves their dog. And so if they're considering going down that path, it's usually out of a place of fear, because like they are getting bit, they are getting redirected on, and have no idea like how to move forward. Or it's a place where, again, they want to get that control either for the safety of like the community, or maybe there's a justification there that if I can get this under control, they're going to have a better quality of life. So regardless of how we get that outcome, let's just get that outcome so we can move forward. And I think that's really important, because for anyone listening, if you are thinking about going down that path, or you have gone down that path, like, honestly, like, I totally get it. And I think we'll have a whole other episode, and we'll talk about why we changed and why we do this. But I think the key point there, especially if you're looking on or the positive reinforcement behavior therapy side, it's really important if you're working with someone that they take the safety concerns seriously. Because especially like online and everything, there's a lot of basically dog training wars about methods, and things can get extremely dogmatic online or in forums and these different things. And really, it's really important, I think, to seek help that, hey, like, obviously we don't want to go down that aversive path, but also I need someone who takes the safety issue seriously and helps me like manage that appropriately and focuses on like, how do we get through today in the short term while we're working on this long-term stuff? And I think that was just a few points that I wanted to add in there.
Absolutely.
Just to add, we did experience that, or we did explore some of that before we did the positive reinforcement training route. In Sudan, there was someone who I was working with while Nova was still very young, and the biggest issue that I had was resource guarding, and someone who was very well-meaning, and I also didn't know differently, but there were things that, just Brian, to your points about the safety element, things that I knew wouldn't work as Nova got older, because I started to, like, for example, pinning and rolling and things that resulted in a whole lot of bites and very strong needly puppy bites out of frustration, and things that I knew as he got older just wouldn't be safe to take that approach anymore, which is also part of the reason why I was thinking about switching to other alternatives. But I think for me, and I don't know whether, Stephanie, you can relate to this or not, but Nova is my first dog as an adult, and I found it to be really overwhelming not knowing the right type of training for him. Like, I feel like I just sort of fell into positive reinforcement training after sort of a process of elimination, of recognizing what didn't work. But I had no idea really all of the different schools of thought around training and all of the different ways to help address and manage those kinds of challenges that we were facing.
Yeah, it's so hard to know. I mean,
it's so hard.
That's part of it. It's a fairly young industry. It's an unregulated industry. It's, there's lots of different types of help available, of varying methods and approaches, and people with varying levels of experience. And it's a sort of a minefield to navigate as an owner.
Like, I would not want to be an owner looking for behavior help. Like, I can't imagine what it's like looking for help right now. Like, I think about that. And every once in a while, like about once every quarter, I just go and look, like, if I was a dog owner searching for stuff, what comes up? And it is, it's really challenging.
Absolutely. So all that said, so you reached out, and we've been so happy to be working with you and have our team our wonderful team of trainers working with you. And I guess one of my questions is, how is the behavior therapy process that you all have been going through, how is it different than maybe what you envisioned before you started the process? I know that's a big question.
And you're not going to hurt her feelings either.
No.
I can start. I will say, like, before we started behavioral training or behavioral support from you guys, I think there's two things that I thought. One, I thought it would be a lot like going to A to B, and then after we get to B, the destination's there, and he'll be healed. All done, all golden, right? And actually, so there's three things. Sorry. First one was the A to B. Second one is around mostly what you guys did for me and for Mike and our expectations. And the third thing is just around my perception around if he needs more help beyond just the training. So the first one is you guys really helped break things down from it's not like you want to get him from where he is right now to be able to sit on the patio with him. Your B might be different, right? He may never be able to sit on a patio with you, but find a destination or a path or a journey that is more aligned to what he can do, and then also break things down into smaller pieces. I think that setting expectations, even in the first session, I thought was super helpful for me, especially Jessica and I, these are our first grown dogs as adults, but I had I think both of us had family pets. My family dog was a lab who had no resource guarding issues. You could stick your whole head in her mouth if you wanted and you could take anything away from her and it was not a problem. And so just realizing that the journey that Nimbus was going to go down was going to be different than the journey that Kauai went down. And like, they're different dogs. I think you guys reinforced that like a billion times with us. And sorry, exaggerating, but like, I think it just took a really long time for me to get there, just because the Disney version of a dog, like you guys use this word with me, or the dogs that I saw sitting on the patio or in the subway were just dogs that were able to go down that path, and it might not be Nimbus. And so like, that is like both 1 and 2, right? Like just setting that expectation for Mike and I, that like what we thought we could get out of like behavioral training may not be. And then also to set expectations in our mind that like, you only get maybe a good 10. I think this thing, like I've reiterated to Mike, like so many times, like if you only get a good 10 years, 15 years, if you're so lucky, and Nimbus is a big dog, so we would be so lucky. Like, what do you want out of that? Like, do you want to spend every moment trying to turn him into this version of a dog he will never be? Or do you want to find a version that you could be happy with? I think when you said that to me, I think like I hung up the call and I was just like devastated, but also I think it just like took a huge weight off my shoulder for us trying to turn him into something he may not be able to be. And like, it helped us like love him for where he is and like all of that. And then the last one, I think it was actually Jessica, like you were on that Q&A session where we had reached a plateau on training and they were like, you might want to talk to a behavioral vet. And I was like, that's probably my reaction. And Jessica, you helped like walk through like how your experience with Nova was. And like, it's not just like, yes, talking through the medication, but also like the community of like care that was built around like you, there's other people who are going through this and like they can share their experiences. And like, also just the ability to just like, I think Jessica, you told me like, oh, it took a while for it to hit, like just setting some expectations. I think that like really helped. And then that's how we like ended up going down that path.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. That's, and that sort of, that for me is, like when you talk about like they only have so long and what kind of relationship do you want with them with the time that you have, like the longer I do this, like the more that really, like when I meet a client for the first time, that's so on the top of my mind, even though like it takes some time to get someone there, because yeah, the worst thing about dogs is they're not around that long. And you know, again, not discounting safety or any other things that, you know, we might need to address, or things can be frustrating, but it's like, how can we have the best like possible together? And like that, I just really love that you said that, because it's, it takes a lot of courage to go down that path. Cause it's very unselfish and it's a big responsibility. And you have to shift your mindset, again, shift expectations and all those things. Like those are not easy or trivial things to do, and to get there takes a lot of work, but it's really, really important. So I'm really glad you shared that. And sorry, Jessica, I don't know if I cut you off there. I just want to make sure I have that point before I forgot.
No, thanks. It's something that Stephanie and I talk a lot about on our walks. And I will be honest, maybe I don't need to say this, but just for the record, I have always loved Nova from the beginning, but working through our behavioral health journey together and seeing the progress and the huge successes and milestones that we've been able to be, and being sort of over the hump of being in the like emergency crisis phase of our journey, a lot of these types of elements are brought up on just sort of on a daily basis, of that recognition that Nova's only here for a short amount of time, and for Nimbus the same. And in terms of setting expectations, but then also settling in to more of a place of acceptance, I think, like, is it necessary for Nova to pass this oncoming dog where there is a 100% chance that he is going to have a reaction to it? Or do we have the option of safely hanging out around the other side of the car for 3-4 seconds while it passes? And if there are more moments like that where we can change the decisions we make in the moment to make life a bit more bearable for the dog in front of us. Safety and all other considerations, being taken into account, then I think that also helps relieve a lot of pressure on myself for feeling like actually we are still in the management phase of walking, and we might always be while we're in New York, but is he able to pass some dogs some of the time? Yes. And so I think to answer your initial question about sort of how has this process been, I think it's been a lot of reevaluating goals along the way, and the ways in which we have reevaluated the goals, working with Casey and Jessica and others, but then also in conversations with you during the Q&A, has really helped me accept the fact of, accepting Nova for where he is in the process, and how we can still work to make improvements, but it's help to, I think, relieve a lot of the stress and pressure that I was feeling on myself in trying to get Nova to a place where he can pass every dog all the time, no matter what, and recognizing that might not be a realistic goal for us right now. And then just one other point, I think this goes back to Stephanie's first point that she made about how we talk a lot about our love for instinct, because it truly has made the relationship that I have with Nova so much stronger. I think I've shared this with you before, but I moved to my specific apartment in East Harlem because I really felt like instinct was my only hope, because I didn't think that there was another place in the city that could provide the types of assistance that we needed. And it has been, overall, the process has been, the help that instinct has been able to provide has strengthened my relationship. But I think one thing that's also, it's given me as a dog owner tools and agency to feel like I have a set of vocabulary now that I didn't have before, in terms of recognizing the subtle signs that Nova has of stress, or looking at conflict resolution strategies and things that I wouldn't have thought about before, which helped me not deliberately put Nova into situations where he's going to have a reaction or be stressed. And that is profound, because that helps me every day. Every time we leave the house, I'm able to pay attention to those subtle signs of stress or other things that I wouldn't have noticed before, or maybe blown through.
I also noticed, Jessica, you also like will point out that there's like environmental things, because I know like when we walk together, sometimes I'll be like, oh my gosh, Nimbus is like a lot more like alert and reactive today, and Jessica will be like, well, the weather is like slightly like different today, or like it could be because I think like now that we've been through this, we were like, oh, it might not just be like us or the dog, there's also the world. And like Jessica was really good about pointing that out. And I'm like, oh gosh, yes, true.
And Nova is a super weather sensitive guy. So for him, like if it's overcast or if there's a chance of rain, or if it is raining, then basically he's out for the day. So I don't know if that, we've talked about that a lot, because it's just really funny. I think, Steph, that's one of the things that we also talk a lot about on our walks, is just how there are all these other impacts, as you said, whether it be weather or something else, but looking at the whole dog for the complexities that it brings to each day, because truly every day is different, and it can also be a time of day throughout that one particular day that we might notice more or less successes or more or less reactivity. And so I think we've both gotten into a place too of not needing to power through. If a walk is going to be too stressful, then we just call it a day and pick up the next day or later in the week or something. But it's pretty special, I think, also which going through this process has helped me realize. It's the vocabulary and other things that you mentioned, but pretty special to be able to have that type of relationship built over time, because for Nova and I, the only way to really reduce some of the high state of arousal and see more successes is to truly know Nova on a very deep level. And so I think this working with him and going through the behavioral therapy has helped me to sort of dial into maybe a deeper level of compassion and understanding for an animal that I might not have had the opportunity to if I didn't have Nova and all the complexities that he brings into the world.
Yeah.
I love that point.
Yeah.
I love a lot of this is about too, like that I heard from both of you, is a lot of this is sort of learning how to redefine what success looks like, you know, and it's like, how do you help you and your dog succeed and sort of win together at the day versus getting through this, like they should be able to do A and B, right? It's like, how do we successfully have a peaceful, happy day together? You know, and what does that look like? I think that's kind of what I heard from you both, and that's super cool.
Yeah, it is. And also just pointing out too, like, I know with both of you, you both have done a lot in terms of like, you know, taking courses or doing things to give you that knowledge. And it's funny, like even, you know, interacting with you both over time, I can tell like each time I speak with you, like the language is different, like how you describe. So it's really easy to get to like the point of like what you're asking about and what you're already thinking about. So it's more like little tweaks or adjustments as opposed to trying to like get these big concepts across, right? Like early on, you're trying to get these like these shifts, mindset shifts to happen, and they're different conversations. And then as you start to learn and do that, and not to make, I don't like when people try to, you know, make something that's challenging positive all the time. But I will say that yes, when you go through having a dog like this, you will learn more things about not just like behavior with dogs. Like it helps you understand, at least from my perspective, it helped me understand people better as well. Because you just think about behavior differently. And it's sort of that scary thing when you first have that realization that, hey, this isn't all just about me. So then it sort of feels like how much control do I actually have? But then I think you get to a point where it's like, oh, like this isn't all just about me. Right. Like I felt like for me personally in my journey, I kind of had those 2 points. And then once you can kind of let that go, to your point, like you can be like, and the weather thing's funny because we always talk about, I don't know if your dogs do this, but like when it's really windy out, like some dogs get a little skittish, and we always say like they got wind up their bum. So it's like for anyone out there, it's like, oh yeah, like, you know, Sammy has wind up his bum today. So I'm probably just going to like, you know, cut the walk short, or whatever. There's, you know, the Puerto Rican Day Parade's going on, so we might want to avoid that route, or the New York City Marathon's going on, so we're going to avoid that, or there's a concert.
Construction outside the building. Like
all those things. And it's sort of like, but it's also being at a point, it's like, is this something worth working through, or is this like a one-off thing that like, I just need to know how to manage this so he feels comfortable and we're not, you know, I'm not creating any sort of conflict or stress throughout the day. That's really not necessary for the long-term health of the dog. And I feel like that's one of the things I heard there. It's like getting smart about, okay, where do we want to actually make progress where it makes sense for both me and for my dog, not just because it's something I feel like I have to do or my dog should do, is really important.
Yeah. And I think it lets you celebrate all the progress that you have made more easily because you're letting go of like some fixed point that you just have to get to. So then you can actually celebrate like, holy cow, like we had an amazing walk and they would never have been able to pass by those dogs again, or they would never have been able to do that before. And that's really cool to see them do that. Whereas if you were still stuck in just trying to get to one place, you might like pick out one point in that walk where you're like, but he did get a little tense when he passed by, you know, or he did have one reaction out of 9 or 10 dogs. And like,
yeah,
that's so much better than where we were before. Or we did duck behind 3 cars and I look how good I got at doing that. Like,
yeah.
You know,
and the other thing too, just, you know, for people, it doesn't mean that you never get frustrated.
Of course.
Either. Like, I'm sure you both have days where you're just like, what the hell is going on today, Nimbus or Nova, right?
Like what the F, guys?
Like, what the F? Like, And
and they probably say that back to you sometimes too.
100%. So it's not even just like that, but I think it's also, at least, and if you can recognize it, I know for me too, like there's times, you're just like, I'm not in the mood to deal with this today, so I'm cutting it short. Like it's okay to recognize to yourself, like, hey, like I have wind up my bum today, or like I'm feeling stressed, or I had a bad day at work. Like I'm not in the mood to deal with any potential reactions or stuff, so we're going to cut the walk short and do stuff. So I think that's also important for people to realize as well that like it's okay. Again, to also recognize yourself and like the environment and what you're going through. And there are times where maybe you have to take a step back and get a little break. Or there's even people, especially working through behavior stuff, where it's like, hey, if they have a place where your dog can board and it's okay, it's like, I need 4 days just to decompress. So like if you have the resources to send them for 4 days of boarding or to send them to daycare so you can do that, like that's okay as well. So I just want to make sure that's okay for people too. That it's sometimes people just need that break, especially in a relationship like this, where you're constantly, trying to help your dog move forward, make sure they're comfortable. That is demanding on mental resources, emotional resources. I think it gets easier for sure, but it doesn't mean it's always easy.
Yes, just because you acquire that knowledge doesn't mean you've suddenly like achieved dog owner sainthood and you're like
right.
have endless amounts of patience and everything else. So that's totally fair. So I love hearing that from those stories from both of you. This next question I have is be a little bit hard, but I do think people would be really curious to know kind of what's been the hardest part of all of this. We may have touched on little points as we went, but what's been the hardest part of the journey? Did you ever reach a point where you just kind of felt like throwing your hands up and quitting? And what sort of made you keep going?
And before we do that part, can I just say, for anyone listening out there, if you're thinking like, it's okay if you're at that point.
Yes.
Like, and I've seen people, they've made decisions where it's rehoming or other options where at the end of the day, like it can be the right choice. It can be an ethical choice. So I just want to make sure if anyone's listening, it's, if you feel like you're at that point, like it's totally okay before we talk about this.
Right. It's a conversation to have. It's not, you must always keep pushing forward no matter what, under any circumstance.
Right.
But since you're both here at the point where you are, and since we all going through this process certainly have kind of peaks and valleys and highs and lows, I am curious to know what's sort of been the hardest part of this for each of you.
I think, Brian, what you were mentioning earlier, which is definitely something that I certainly can relate to and still have very hard days with Nova. And of course, it's not to say that I'm immune to any of the other stressors in the city or anything like that as well. So there was a point when we had just moved, and then even really up until the point when Nova started behavioral medication, that I felt like my entire life was consumed by thinking about and caring for Nova, and the sort of caregiver element and emotional toll that had on me personally was really hard, because there was the social elements that was also impacted in terms of thinking about just doing things for myself. It felt really hard to be able to do that because I felt like I didn't have a choice. Like I wasn't at a place with Nova where I felt like it would be okay to do anything else but focus on progress with Nova. And that totally consumed my ability to have energy to do really anything else. And so that took an emotional toll on me personally. So your reminder, Brian, to take a step back is one, at least for me, that it's a good reminder, because it can be really heavy to be dealing with all these complex behavioral challenges, but then also just to have a really bad day. And so that would be one thing that I felt is really hard. But then also, the social element in terms of, getting the innocuous question from a well-meaning friend asking, how's Nova? And, sort of navigating that kind of dynamic, I don't know if it was necessarily shame that came up for me, but this feeling of it's complex. Like that's a seemingly easy question to answer, but has a really complex answer, because today Nova was great, but overall we're still dealing with a lot of reactivity and high arousal and these types of things, that the small wins that we were talking about earlier really fall flat with other people who maybe don't understand how much of a big win it is. Like I still remember the exact place where Nova passed his first dog ever, 95th in Lexington. And that was a really exciting moment for me. There's a lot of heavy loneliness, I think, in not having a sense of community, which I feel like I have now. But in terms of thinking about, I mean, Sarah, you and I had this discussion when I myself was having big feelings after a particular incident with Nova about, do you feel safe? Is this the right fit? And I never got to the point of feeling like I needed to make an alternative decision in terms of going down the rehoming conversation. But there were a lot of points where I just felt like I know the training and behavioral goals that we have with instinct, but meeting those benchmarks feel impossible. It feels like hurdles that maybe we'll get to 6 months, a year from now. And truly, for a lot of things, it has been about that timeline. And I think just really trying to keep things small and like having very minimal expectations on really hard days and taking a step back is something that I think was most helpful, but it's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. And also for people listening, or I guess, for anyone, listening who's dealing with this, and it's also okay to change your mind at some point, like I feel like there's so much pressure on, I think, pet owners to work through these issues no matter what. And I honestly feel like that pressure generally comes from people who have never really dealt with it. Because I don't think they really I really feel like people who say like, oh, like, you just work through it, or don't give up, or don't whatever, like you haven't been humbled.
And I think that sometimes the hardest situation, or some of those, it's either someone who's not had that experience at all, or we also have lots of clients who come in who maybe have a dog with what sound like similar issues, but are different dogs with different genetics and different, early learning experiences and all that kind of stuff. And like, I'm not going to say those dogs make a 180, but like there can people who go through training where like all that stuff, Stephanie, that you did early on with Nimbus, like just clicked and worked. And that's what the dog's like, oh, I get it. I understand. And they made that progress. And so from that owner's life experience, that shapes their view. And they're like, well, just train them more. Mm-hmm. Or, you just must not be doing it right because they had a different experience. I think one of the fortunate things I would say in sort of working with a company or a professional who does lots of behavior work is they have a nice broad range of experiences. They know that dogs and owners can land at different spots.
Yes.
Along the way. And it's not just, hey, you must just not be doing something right.
Yeah. And honestly, like one of my least favorite referrals to get is if you actually had a dog who had like some really challenging issues and you do 2 sessions and it just like, there's like those dogs where you do like you just 2 things and it's like everything's magically different. And they refer you to everyone with a behavior issue. And you're like, oh no, this is not what it looks like.
I'm really glad it worked really well.
I'm really happy. I'm really grateful for the referral.
I just want you to know that's not going to be the process every time for every dog.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, but I do appreciate you sharing, sharing that because it is, it's challenging and that the emotional and cognitive load of doing that is very real. And I just want to make sure for anyone listening, if you're dealing with that, one, it's okay. Mm-hmm. And also if you've been doing it for a while and you're getting to a point where it's like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Like you can reach out and talk to someone because,
and anyone who comes at you with judgy shaming vibes for that is not the right person for you to talk to.
No, like whether it's a rescue or whether it's a trainer or behavior consultant or friend or whatever, like it really should, and again, like even with these conversations, it's like, again, every person who's made really tough decisions love their dog more than anyone else on this planet. And I know it's easy for us to see, especially working through that, because we get to see that all the time. So yeah, I just want to make sure, I love having all this talk about the journey and all these different things, but also if people are just feeling like they're getting to a place where it's just too hard, it's okay to have those conversations. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I know it's heavy.
No, that's okay. We're going to switch gears in a second. But Stephanie, what do you think? What's sort of been the hardest part of all of this for you?
I think Jessica put it perfectly with the feeling of isolation. I think for Nimbus, our situation was slightly different, right? Like after our first session with Instinct, he actually our main issue was communication. So embarrassingly, I might have recommended Instinct because the first initial session really it was just a communication issue, right? But I think the main kind of the lowest point was I expected it to get better, right? It went from this to here, and I expected it to go here. I guess I gotta show it this way, it go here, but it kind of went from this to oh, we know how to communicate, to there was one point where he had an incident with his walker, and he also had separation anxiety, so we had no other option for how to manage him at home. And so it went from it got so much better to dropping off the cliff. All the support network we had to manage him while I had to go back to work just kind of disappeared. And I just felt it was either I go to work or I ask Mike to stay late, or we just didn't know what else to do. We couldn't have someone come into our house. He couldn't be alone, right? So it just I felt trapped. And I think that was probably one of the lowest points, maybe not for that particular incident, right? Because it was something that happened and we worked through it. But it was just the fact that I had expected things to just exponentially get better, and then it didn't. And I was well, I thought when I reached out to Instinct, it would get better, guys. Why did this happen? And obviously it wasn't anything. It was just a journey for him was not going to be linear. And when I saw something challenging happen, I was great, now I'm alone doing this again by myself, and truly alone without the walker, right? Now I have to find something else. And then you guys helped me think through other options. But I think that was probably the hardest. It's just not that particular incident, but the fact that I was oh great, this is not always going to go like this.
Yeah. Well, I think that's I love that. I think that's, you captured why some of those setbacks when you're going through this are so hard, because a lot of times you're reaching out for help at a point where you've already I don't want to say reached the end of your rope, but you're already feeling emotionally and mentally tired. And then things get better and you start to let your shoulders drop down from your ears and let your guard down a little bit and experience some relief. And then something happens and you're just I knew it. You're just, all the wind sort of gets sucked out of your sails, and it's so hard to recover from it. It just is. But full credit to you, Stephanie. You just kind of dug in and had those feelings, and then reached out and said well, what do we do from here? But I totally recognize why that's so stinking hard. It's not about that one incident. It's about everything that's preceded it, and that letting your guard down and then just sort of feeling you get kicked in the teeth.
We were oh, he's cured. He's it's great. Everything's good, and it's that celebration. And then the oh no, he is working through a process. It's just not one good walk is he's never going to react again, right? I think that was just something that I gotta remember, that he's going through something.
Yeah. So
That's
just on Stephanie's point, setbacks in general, especially when there is something that comes up, a behavioral concern that comes up later on, that has been, I guess, my most recent experience that I can draw from in terms of cooperative care, and just realizing how stressed and stressful vet visits can be for really everyone involved. But the low points of trying to do the best for your dog and realizing that there's so much that goes into trying to do the best for your dog, because for a dog that doesn't like going to the vet and has a pretty severe fear of being in that kind of environment, trying to do what's best for your dog physically is really hard, because there's also the emotional side of that. And that is something that still feels really hard, because it's a newer experience that we're going through. And those sorts of reminders, Stephanie, to your point about training and the whole journey not being linear, is, yeah, it's an important reminder, because there aren't points at which I feel like you can completely let down your guard and feel like, okay, we're no longer managing as much as we were, or he's done being reactive or something. It always requires work.
And when something new shows up, you're like, oh, another boss came. Like you have to find another boss, and you gotta have different weapons for it. And you're like, I thought we already figured out all the different bosses we had to fight, but then like another player shows up, and you're like, great.
That's an amazing analogy.
That is amazing.
I love that so much.
Yeah, I'll cut this part out. I'm definitely making a social media clip out of that with like little boss things coming out. But yeah.
I'm definitely stealing that, Stephanie, to use with other clients, because I love that analogy. It's so accurate and on point. So I know that was a little bit heavy, but this is heavy. Like this is hard and challenging sometimes, in spite of all the good moments. But switching gears a little bit and going through this, if you had
can I just add one thing before we go forward? I think the thing too, for anyone listening who's going through this, I would say, I don't want to exaggerate, I'm going to say 80 to 90% of clients, and I take a subset of people who really got really far, and really took things, really worked hard to get to where they did and made a ton of progress. I would say with 80 or 90%, there's usually a phone call or something that's done, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 months in, where you have like that event, that backslide, where people feel like again, thinking that it's going to be linear and not knowing it's kind of like that 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 3 steps forward, 1 step back. And sometimes that step back can be like it feels like 4 or 5 steps, or you sort of fall off
or it's like a weird sideways step and you fall off the patio.
Yeah. And in my early days of my career, to be perfectly honest, I almost took that as like an insult sometimes. Like it was hard to, it almost felt like, oh, like you're saying like the training's not working, right? Like I always felt like it was like a reflection on me. So kind of even just talking about the complexity on this side of the relationship. Whereas like now, thankfully, doing this a long time, it's like, this is part of this. And it's it's our job to sort of help you with that conversation and understanding like that is part of the process. And I'm really glad you spoke about it, because I think having this and having that to share with people when they do, that's going to be like really, really helpful. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is very much so. So switching gears, if you had to pull out, again, not suggesting, oh, I'm so happy this happened, right? Like I'm so happy I got the opportunity to work through these issues with Nimbus or with Nova. But if you had to call out, like, what are some of the best parts that you would pull out from this journey, maybe with regards to your relationship with your dog or relationships with others, or just, I have no idea. It could be anything, but what do you feel like are maybe sort of the positives or the best parts of this journey so far?
Everything. I was kidding. I think you guys can tell. I like to like break it into like buckets. So I think that's why we like you so much, Stephanie, because I love to break things into buckets. Yeah. It's like almost a compulsive. Yes, I'm a fan. Bucket 1, relationship with dog. Bucket 2, like a relation, like Mike and I like doing something together. Bucket 3, relationship with other people, right? Like, so bucket 1, relationship with Nimbus. I feel like there in the beginning, it felt a lot like I'm taking care of something that doesn't like, it's not understanding me kind of relationship. And I think the best part of like working through this with him being a more complex, emotional, big feeling dog is like, now I feel like him and I are actually communicating. Like, not just he understands obedience words, like sit down, whatever. Like, I understand, I can see his body language. I can understand when he doesn't want to do something. Like, there have been times Jessica and I have tried to go on walks in the middle of the day where he just lays down and Jessica and I are like, oh, I guess Nimbus doesn't want to go on a walk today. I'm going home, you know, like, just like him and I being able to communicate. I'm trying not to force him as much to do things that, if I possibly can, do things that he doesn't want to do. I think like that has built a stronger trust relationship. And I feel like if we didn't go through this, that might not be there, right? And with some dogs, it might already naturally just already exist. Nimbus is not that, right? Like, he has very strong feelings about what he does and does not want to do. That is him. So I think that's the first bucket about. The second bucket is like Mike and I just like going through this together and just learning a little bit more about what it's like to like take care of another living, breathing thing, and really just trying to figure out how we can take care of him the best way possible. So like every step of the way as we went through this process, it was like deciding, what do we want to do with him? Like, even with when we talked about, like, I was at the point where I was so scared, should we do a shock collar? Like, Mike's conversation with me was like, do we think that that would be something that's sustainable, where his behavior would be consistent when he doesn't have that on, right? Should we go down a different route? Like, those kind of conversations, I think, help build our relationship even more, that we were trying to work towards. He called it our project, but he's our dog, like, together, right? Like, I thought that was something that was really helpful for us and our relationship. And the third thing is relationship with others. And I break that into two, right? People we don't care about on the street where we're advocating for our dog. Before, Stephanie, people please be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, but like, blah, 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 blah. Like, now I'm like, I'm not, to be frank, I am still a people pleaser, but I'm not as afraid to just advocate for Nimbus, and I will pull him out of the way. And I do still care, but I'm going to say it to you guys because I'm going to pretend like it, but I try not to care if people are insulted, because it's not you. And I don't think your dog is vicious. It's that your dog has pointy ears and is a big black dog, and Nimbus just happens to not. He's a little bit doggist. Like, and I'm like, with other, like, I am now less afraid. I'm not going to be rude and be like, F you, get out of the street. Like, but I will move my dog out of the way. And I'm sorry if that makes you feel uncomfortable, but I'm going to do that. Right. Like, I think that just like this experience has empowered me to just do, like Jessica said, just pull your dog out of a situation where like your dog isn't going to do well in it. And like, I'm less embarrassed by it. I'm still embarrassed by it and I'm working on it, but like, I'm less embarrassed by it. And then like the second part of it is like the community of people that like I've met through this, right? Like, Jessica and I met, and now we're like friends through the Q&A sessions, right? Like we had two very different dogs with very different situations. And like now Nova and Nimbus have like walks together. Like, we've built like a trusting relationship between the dogs and us. Like, it has been phenomenal. Like, being able to talk to other people on the street who have these issues and situations, like, that has been really great. So I think out of all of the pain and suffering and crying and like did we make a mistake? What did we do wrong? Like, out of all of that, I think all of the pain and suffering, I think we built a lot on top of all that pain and suffering.
Mm. Yeah, well said.
Very well said. Jessica, how about you?
There have been, now I feel like that I'm at a point of reflection, not being in crisis mode. I have been thinking a lot more often about the really positive things that have maybe not necessarily come out of this as a result of Nova's complexities, but just being able to see more clearly through some of the complexities to appreciate where we are. One of the things that I think has been so helpful though through this process is acceptance in general, again, for where we are in the process, and trying to find and appreciate some of those moments together, some of the positive moments together. So one example that I can think of is doing an activity that Nova loves, which is finding a very quiet spot in Central Park and just sitting in the sun and being a village dog and watching life pass by. And there are still days where he's not able to do that because there might be so many triggers that he's not able to enjoy doing that activity. But there are so many more times that he's able to do that. Or I see, as a result of this process that we've gone through, that there's more times where it's easier for him to disengage. And now some of what that disengagement looks like is playing and easing into playing and like rubbing his face in the grass, and then just like a full body roll into the grass from a few seconds prior where I was unsure whether or not he might react to a dog going by. So it's really cool to see that whole shift in terms of his whole body. He's able to relax in so many more places than he was a year and a half ago. And through that, it's so special and is an experience that I don't take for granted. And even talking about it now, it's getting me a little bit emotional, but having those quiet, special moments together, and building those sort of core memories and experiences together, which for Nova, that looks like sitting in the grass and doing nothing together. So doing more of those special moments of doing nothing where he's comfortable and able to enjoy the things that he loves, and being able to do that in a place like Manhattan, which is a place that a year and a half ago, he was unable to relax and have in most places in Manhattan. So that's one of the things that I think that I reflect on a lot. And then also, as Steph said, the community, feeling like I'm no longer in that space of isolation, and knowing that there are others who are experiencing similar things as we are. But also, I think the longer I go through this process, so Nova is just over 2, and I recognize now how much I've learned, and I expect over the course of the next 2 years and the 2 years beyond that, I will learn even more, of being more willing to not put Nova into certain situations that I think he should be able to do, and more of finding what works for us. So if Central Park in the spring is too busy, or the dog parks are too busy, then we can rent a car and go hiking on a Saturday, and finding more creative alternatives that work for Nova. Feeling that overall sense of empowerment and being able to make different decisions, because I know better now, or differently now. And then one of the things that I still really love and see a lot more of these moments too is seeing how much more often Nova is able to think clearly in situations where last year he would have been completely paralyzed by his big emotions. And that is definitely a result of the work that we've done through Instinct, and something that we work on a daily basis. But seeing moments where he might be on the brink of reacting and I'm just about to intervene, and then I see him turn to engage, and there's a lot more of those moments. And so it's really encouraging that now I can expect setbacks at some point along the way, or different challenges that may come up, but I know that he is more often in a place of learning, and that overall state of level of happiness and contentment in the city is really meaningful.
I do have one last question for each of you, but I think before that, I know Brian, this echoes your thoughts as well, but I'm so endlessly impressed with both of you.
Yeah.
All the time. You know, it's as much, I know multiple times you all have mentioned the Q&As, that just so if folks don't know, part of for clients at Instinct, we do sort of ongoing like Zoom Q&As where you can just kind of drop in and chat and ask questions. And I love them too as a way for clients to connect with each other, because as you said, this can be pretty isolating, but the opportunity to interact with both of you over the last, I don't know, it's probably been close to a year, right?
At least.
On an ongoing basis is just, every time I know we get off, and if it's just myself or just Brian doing the call, we get off, like, Jessica was on the call today, or Stephanie's on the call today, and here's what we talked about. And I don't know, you should both be incredibly proud, and Stephanie, Mike as well, like, you should be incredibly proud of everything that you've done for your dogs and yourselves, and just how much you sort of grown and learned and been flexible through this whole process. Like, it's really incredible. And I think I just want to emphasize that, like, what you've done is,
it's above and beyond. Yeah. Right. Like, and again, there's no judgment if people say they can't do this, but it's also very fair to recognize that, what you've done is really remarkable. It's really inspiring, and it's why we choose to do this, for a living. And I also wanted to say to Jessica, just on that point about that time, you're sitting out and just observing stuff together and doing that and taking that in. And I think you said you got a little emotional thinking about it, but it was like, and just talking about dogs not being around, that when I think back to like our past dogs that we've had, my visions in my head are like, it's almost exactly that moment. Like, it's just sitting watching a lake,
like being the most dog
yes
they can be.
Yes.
Just like doing the most mundane, like, dog things, like you said, like rolling in the grass, or like just lifting their head up and smelling the air, and especially in situations where they wouldn't have done it before. It's like the best feeling.
It is.
So
I just want to, because I would do almost anything to go back to some of those moments. So it just reminded me of that. So
so if each of you, I know this could be a long answer, but if you could attempt to briefly tell, if you could give advice to other people kind of just starting out who were in your shoes, or maybe give advice to your former self when you were just starting, what would you say to people?
There's a lot there, because on one hand, I would say that there are many things that I would go back and do differently, and it's true, I would. But then also on the other hand, there's just so much that I didn't know, that I don't also want to place blame on myself for what I didn't know at the time. So I want to make sure that if other people are at the beginning of their journey, that they know that too, because there's just, as we talked about earlier, just so much out there in terms of information and types of training and what's best for your dog. It's really hard, I think, to know what's best. But I think other ways that I would have maybe done things differently would have been maybe starting a little bit sooner, or exploring other options a little bit sooner. I think Instinct was, of course, the best place for Nova and I to be and learn together. So I wouldn't change anything there. But on the emotional side, in terms of what we talked about earlier, I myself would change or try to do more to also prioritize myself, because it's really easy, I think, to get locked into the caregiving, emotional labor side and high investment side of wanting to see results and wanting to do the best to make the environment better for you and your dog. But you can't progress and do those things if you're also not caring for yourself. And it's easier said than done. And it's a constant, even now, it's something that I constantly think about. But that's probably the biggest thing that I would do, because a lot of being in these low places myself, in terms of our journey overall, was because I was ruminating on the things that went wrong and dwelling on how many reactions we're having or on the difficult days. And there's so much more if I would have just taken a step back or 3 steps back and had more down days along the way, that I think I would have been in a better place to work with Nova. So I think that's the biggest thing that I would have done differently. And the biggest piece of advice that I would give people who are just starting off or might be going through something similar.
I love that. Like seeing the world beyond your dog. Seeing the world beyond your dog doesn't diminish how much you care about them or how much you care about them getting better.
Yep.
I think that's super important. Stephanie, how about you?
Okay. I'm going to try to do mine in threes again. I think if I had to give myself advice or anyone else who's starting, I would say 3 things. 1, that like recognize that you're doing your best. Or that's the assumption, right? You're doing your best and you might not know what the next step is, and like reach out for help when you need it. I think but also just recognize like you're trying, right? I think sometimes you feel like when you reach out for help, it's because you failed, but like, no, you just might not know exactly what's going on and what you need to do next. The second one I would say is you're going to get a lot of advice, especially if you have a dog where its behavior is very noticeable on the street. And so I would say, like, if I were going back to someone else who's don't listen to everyone's advice. They might not work for you. Like, don't hear everyone's comments as criticism. And I feel like that's kind of what I internalized. So like, that's probably the second thing I would say. Like, there's going to be a lot of advice coming your way. Not all of them are going to be relevant for you, or be helpful, right? I got some interesting advice from some dog trainers on the street that really hurt me emotionally. And I just anyways, that's the second one. And the third thing is, I would say, is like, trust your instincts, because there were people who were telling me certain things that I should be doing with my dog where it didn't work with how I wanted. I think we talked about this earlier with like what I wanted to do with Nimbus, or what I thought was right, or what I was comfortable with. And like, everyone's journey will look different. And some of that might work for another person and their relationship with their dog, but that wasn't going to work for me. So I think like my third thing would be like, trust your instincts, right? Some of them are going to tell you that this is not going to be the right route for you to take. Or I think there were some things we had talked about before about like, when is it the right time to ask for help? So I think those would be the 3 things that I would say.
Awesome. That's, I think people are going to find that incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
So I can't thank you both enough for investing the time to come and do this today. I think you shed a lot of light on what this experience is like. And I think people who maybe are going through it themselves are going to feel less isolated.
Yes. I'm so excited to have this for people. And actually feel a sense of community, even just from this and hearing that there's other people going through similar things. If there are people who haven't experienced this before, you get a window into, maybe bite your tongue if you feel a comment coming up, or maybe give someone some space on the street and, recognize that that people love their dogs and are often working really hard to make life better for them. Yeah. Cool.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Jessica.
Thank you.
Right.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.